all of the, did we check all the microphones are hot and working?
Testing, testing.
Test.
Sing.
Test, test.
Okay.
Nobody wants us to see.
Okay, just let me get settled for a minute, and we will be all set. Okay, I want to welcome you, first of all of you who have come out. I see we have an extremely full crowd, which is a wonderful thing for a primary with all of these wonderful candidates. I am so pleased that everyone... Before we start, make sure that you all know that this forum is being sponsored by the Columbia County Democratic Committee and by the chapter. I would also like to welcome our honored guest tonight, which is Assemblywoman Dee Dee Barrett. Is being moderated by the Rensselaer County League of Women Voters. Our timekeeper is from the Rensselaer County League, Lori Smith. And I am your moderator, Barbara Bartoletti. I must tell you, with all this enthusiasm, I must feel a little guilty. I am a Rensselaer County League member. However, I do not live in the 19th Congressional District, which is League policy. I live in the 20th district, so it is league policy to have someone moderate who is not able to vote in that district. So, but I do want to tell you a little bit, for those of you who may not know about the League of Women Voters. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages the active participation in government of all of its members. We do not support or oppose political candidates or parties. We do, however, advocate through education and advocacy for the positions that the League adheres to. And with that, I don't want to spend any more time because we have many candidates and so few time to get to know all of them. So we're going to proceed. I will tell you that the candidates did draw a lot before the forum for their seating, so they are seated in the order that they drew. There was one other drawing just outside a minute ago for what I call the Secret Santa, although it's the wrong season. These, for our challenge round, these candidates got to pick the name of one of their colleagues, and they get to ask a question of that colleague. They will have 2 minutes to add, 1 minute, I believe, to ask that question, and then 1 minute to reply to the rebuttal of the person you asked the question of. So it should be, we did this for a very sane reason. All of these men and women sitting on the stage are Democrats. And so we wanted to be able to have you, the informed voter, actually begin to distinguish between these candidates. So we all think that they probably have certain positions on issues. We wanted, however, to give them the opportunity to say something to each other that they might not have been able to ask before. That's the challenge round. But we are going to start with the candidate remarks, which will be opening remarks, will be 2 minutes, and they will be asked the opening remark. The first candidate will be Ms. Collier.
Thank you everyone for coming today. It's a real honor to be here and to be able to speak to everyone. My name is Erin Collier. I'm from Cooperstown, where my family has been living for 8 generations. My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather settled in the area in the 1700s, settled what's Colliersville, the town right outside of Cooperstown, and we have been there ever since. We've been farming there for 5 generations. So I grew up on a farm. I grew up very poor. We qualified actually for reduced lunches. I have been working since I was 14 years old, and my parents both worked second jobs. So I know what it's like to go without, and I know that there are a lot of other families that are really struggling in our district. Today, I'm a well-educated economist, and instead of going to work on Wall Street or in some very lucrative job, I instead chose to dedicate my career to helping others. I have worked in health clinics in poor neighborhoods where there are no other health services for impoverished, vulnerable people. I have worked to help ethnic minorities gain access to public services to help lift them out of poverty. And now, most recently, I have worked on a U.S. government project that focuses on food security to prevent food shortages for starving people. So I have worked my entire career to help others. My entire track record is about choosing people over profit, and I think we need more of that in our leadership. The Republicans continue to favor the wealthiest Americans while cutting Medicaid and trying to cut SNAP benefits and making it harder for people to survive that are already struggling just to get by. I cannot and I will not watch what the Republicans are doing. We need change in this country and in our district, and I am that change, and I would be honored to fight for you and represent you. Thank you.
Next candidate, Mr. Beals.
Hi, I'm Jeff Beals. I'm a high school teacher in Woodstock and a former United States diplomat. And I want to thank the hundreds of volunteers who have made my campaign possible, who have plastered this town in signs that I passed as we drove in, because we're building a movement to speak out on the issue that is too often ignored. And that issue is the issue of income inequality. It is the defining crisis of our time. It drives communities into poverty. It causes opioid addiction, illness. It pollutes our environment. It pits neighbor against neighbor. This is not the America that I believed in growing up, or that I stepped forward to serve and represent as a United States diplomat. Our country is and has to be so much more than people calling it a job when they crawl around the floor of an Amazon fulfillment center, receiving poor wages and little to no benefits. Fulfillment should mean more than that. And my campaign is about speaking for the fulfillment that has been lost, but is there in the American promise. We have to pass Medicare for all now. We have to pass a federal jobs guarantee. We have to raise Social Security benefits so our seniors can retire in dignity. I'm a tough, experienced progressive who has fought for these things in my life. As a diplomat, I initiated the first high-level ceasefire talks in the Iraq War. As a teacher, I took my students to the Women's March. And now, as a leader in our community, I held one of the first resistance events for a swing left that took place in our district after the last election. That's why I've been endorsed and supported by the national group, the Justice Democrats, and by the People for Bernie, a group standing up for the values that are being ignored in our democracy, the value of a job, the value of every human life, and the meaning of the American promise for everybody here. It would be my honor to represent you and take that message straight to John Faso, who represents its very opposite. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Pam Klein, Columbia County Democratic Committee. Good evening. 3 weeks from tomorrow is the big decision day. And I know you all have a tough choice to make. It's an easy decision, I think, for all of us, because we know who we're voting for. I know for all of you, it's been now a year of us knocking on your door and calling you up and seeing signs and mail. I believe to win New York 19, to win this race, because that's what we need to do this fall, we need a different type of candidate with a different type of approach. And that's what I've been doing from day one in my campaign. I bought a 1999 Ford Winnebago. For the last year, I've been traveling to every single town in this congressional district. There's 163 of them. We are larger than the state of New Jersey. From Hoosick down to Forestburg, from Edmonston down to Pauling. We've been going to every town, talking to Democrats, Republicans, independents, everyone. And what also makes me different is that this is not my first time in these towns. I have many of these towns up in the Catskill Mountains I went to when I was growing up here. I worked in state government experience. I was out after Hurricane Irene helping small businesses and farmers get back on their feet. And what I have seen is that 85% of the issues there is agreement on. I've spoken with Trump voters who say they'll never vote for a Democrat, but then you ask them, well, what is your top voting issue? Is what will you do to support our local fire department, which can't find volunteers because we've lost so many of our young people? We can win over these voters to our side, but we can only win them up by showing up. And that's what I've been doing from day one in my campaign. And what I have also seen is that there is something new happening across this district. Just this past Sunday, I was in Poughkeepsie in the pouring rain. We had high school students from across the Hudson Valley who came out wearing orange to say enough is enough. These young people, they can't even vote yet, but they were walking the streets of Poughkeepsie chanting, "We will vote, we will vote, we will vote." This generation will stand up, hold these politicians who've been in office for far too long accountable for failing to act on common sense gun safety, and it will sweep across this district, this nation, and finally do something about this important issue. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Flynn, and thank you so much for being here. This crowd is amazing. It reminds me of a crowd at an opening night of a community theater production I did recently. No, it doesn't. I've never had a crowd like that. Anyway, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for doing this, and in fact, it was formed right after suffrage to help inform voters, and that's exactly what we're doing here today. You all have a tough choice to make on June 26th, and there are great people up here on the stage that I've gotten to know for the last year. But I want to explain to you why I know I'm the right candidate. I've been around this district for the past 15 months. I have done 360 plus campaign stops in 130 towns. And here's why I know I'm the right candidate. I'm a lifelong progressive Democrat. I think I'm one of only 2 Democrats on this stage who's actually a lifelong Democrat. I come to you with a track record of fighting for progressive causes, including immigrant rights and public education and environmental protection. And most importantly, I've been advocating for Medicare for all for over a decade. And John Faso chose to take away our health care. And we're going to need someone who can stand up to him with a track record and understanding that issue to make it happen. Second, I'm the only candidate with a track record of creating good-paying, blue-collar American jobs. There's not full employment in our district. Some of our counties have unemployment 50% above the national average. Unemployment and economic development is one of the key issues. I love the contrast of me standing up. I've created hundreds of good-paying American jobs against John Faso, who's created 0, or as someone pointed out yesterday, he created 1 for himself. I'm also the only candidate who's been to Washington and gotten legislation passed. I helped pass, it took me over 2 decades to have passed the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act. What's important about that is I can neutralize any advantage he might have as being more experienced. I'm also a union member. I'm backed by labor unions, and I also am the only one whose campaign staff is unionized. And I've created union jobs. There are 150,000 union members that used to vote for us, and we need to win them back. I'm someone who can appeal across the aisle. I've got the support of progressive organizations, labor union, and also some of the track record of getting it done, and that's what we need in Washington right now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Clegg. You are an amazing crowd, I will say that. And you are the reason we're going to beat John Faso. So, I've been your neighbor since 1981, after moving back from doing a Vista Volunteer National Service with the Lakota Sioux. I'm a trial lawyer and an ordained deacon. On the trial lawyer side, I have a passion for justice. And on the other side, I love my neighbor. Now, my story is a bit of a David and Goliath story. The last 4 decades, I've been taking on the predatory conduct of big corporations representing working class folks. And I've been winning time after time after time. Both inside and outside the court, I fought against systematic racism and sexism. And I've devoted hundreds of hours of my pro bono time representing women who've been the victim of domestic violence. As chair of the Human Rights Commission, I've expanded and protected the rights, the civil rights of the people in my community. I want to bring all of that to Congress. I want to fight for Medicare for all. I want to fight for campaign finance reform, fight for fair share taxes, fight to protect the environment and to stop using fossil fuels and change over to a clean energy world. I want to take on the NRA, the gun lobby, and the gun manufacturers, and I want to fight for common sense gun control. I also want to fight for women's rights. John Faso has betrayed us on all these issues. John Faso is the embodiment of all that's wrong in our system of government, and our political system that's based on greed and corruption. I've been making a living holding people like John Faso accountable. If you give me the chance, I will hold him accountable in this race. Just a few days ago, I was at the Hudson High School. There was a panel on gun control. I got one question to ask John Faso, HR 38. And in that question, he turned into a bunch of mush because he had no answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Antonio Delgado, candidate for Congress. Thank you. Now, I live in Dutchess County with my wife and our little boys, Maxwell and Coltrane, for the jazz fans out there. But I'm running for Congress because for too long, our political leaders have forgotten. They have forgotten about working folk. They have forgotten about working families like the one I came from. Born and raised in Schenectady. Parents, proud employees of GE, who over a 30-year period of time were able to plan and plot their children's future based on secure, predictable income. We lived a dream, from cutting coupons to putting clothes on layaway to our first brand new home when I was a freshman in high school. Off to Colgate, where I studied philosophy and political theory, then Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and then back home to Harvard, where I met my beautiful wife, Lacey, who grew up an hour away in Woodstock.
Lacey rocks.
Thank you. She does. Now, we've lived a wonderful life for the last 40 some odd years, but a different story has happened right here at home. The economy has doubled in size. Wages have gone nowhere. 80% of folks are being asked to share 10% of the wealth. The top 10% last year alone captured more than 75% of all the income. And the answer we get is to roll back our healthcare system. The answer we get is a tax scam on the backs of working and middle class folks. I say enough is enough. I'm fed up. And we need folks in Congress who get it, who will fight for universal health care, who will fight to make sure we have universal pre-K, who will fight to make sure that we protect our environment, who will fight to make sure that we close corporate loopholes and all these godforsaken tax havens overseas that keep our prosperity at the top and somehow make us have to wish that it somehow trickles down to us. Trickle is not just. It must bubble up from the ground. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Pat Ryan. Thank you all for coming. I remember standing on this stage, I actually don't remember exactly how many months ago, but we didn't have near as many people. It was a lot colder. It was dark. And both in terms of number of people in the room, the energy, I can just feel the momentum that in 22 days, we are going to take back our party and then set us up to take back the district on November 6th. For those of you that don't know me, I've met a lot of you already. Born and raised in Kingston. My family's been in Ulster County for 5 generations. And I grew up fortunate. I had great parents and family, teachers, coaches, mentors, and they all taught me the same thing. I was part of a community. I was part of something bigger than myself. And with that came a responsibility to serve, to give back, to participate. And so after graduating Kingston High School, for me, that meant going down an hour south to West Point. That then meant serving 2 combat deployments in Iraq in a war that I didn't agree with, but in which I'm proud of my service and doing my best in a tough situation to bring folks home. And then it meant starting a tech company to try to get better technology out to our troops in harm's way who we weren't giving the right equipment to and who we weren't giving the right strategy to. But I'm running for Congress today because I look around my community, our community, and I feel, I'm sure, the same way you do. We're backsliding. This is not the country that I and my fellow soldiers and so many others in this room were willing to serve and risk and be a part of. We're cutting our health care. 60,000 people in the district would have lost their health care. Rolling back environmental safety protections. Caving in to the gun lobby to the point that I was at the same event that Gareth was at. These students giving out these bracelets to wear orange saying, I don't feel safe going into our schools. So I'm going to tackle that issue in particular head on. In our first campaign ad, I directly address the scourge of gun violence, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you for being here.
I passion in this room, but I'm going to ask a favor of all of you, since we do have a very serious time constraint. Now that you have applauded for all of them, can you just not applaud in between each candidate? I think it will save us some time and you will be able to hear more from them. So we're going to proceed immediately to the questions. And the first question, since Ms. Collier started us, the first question will go to Mr. Beals. And that question is, President Trump has denounced trade agreements. He has withdrawn the United States from several trade agreements, and he also wants to negotiate NAFTA. He has imposed new, proposed, high tariffs on aluminum and steel, even on our closest allies. China, the European Union, and Canada are now pursuing trade agreements without the U.S. and now probably against the U.S. What would you propose that would be the best strategy for expanding U.S. export opportunities while protecting the United States from unfair trade practices? And if you want me to repeat any part of it, I won't. You have 1 minute. I believe 1 minute. Big job.
I'm going to speed talk now, so stick with me. Our concern for this country has to be about the meaning of work for working people. We have a crisis of employment in this country, and it's not the crisis that people want you to think about when you read even the front page of the New York Times. The simple fact is that as job growth takes place, as our stock market rises, wages have remained stagnant for 40 years now, and we have witnessed the largest transfer of wealth that we could imagine over these last 40 years, to the point that 2% of the people in the United States have as much wealth as the remaining 90%. Part of that is because we've lost our eye about what our trade agreements must achieve. NAFTA was a mistake. We should state it baldly right now. We're engaged in a race to the bottom because we do not have internationally enforceable environmental and labor laws that ensure that our workers are not competing against mistreated workers elsewhere. I would stand up for fair trade, not just free trade.
Thank you, Mr. Beals.
Thank you.
Sorry, these are so short time, but there's so many candidates. Yes, go ahead.
No, I remember it.
Okay.
This is an issue that's affecting New York 19. I was out in the town of Conesville in Schoharie County, and a local contractor came to one of our events and said he was a registered Democrat but almost never voted Democrat. But this is the issue that was going to motivate him this year, because the price of tin on the roofs that he was using for his projects had gone up over $1 per square foot. It was driving up the cost of doing business, about $400 more per roof. So these trade deals are affecting this district, and we must make sure that we are bringing that story to the forefront this fall against Faso, who has been absolutely silent on them. My policy with trade deals is very simple. What will it do for workers here in America? My campaign has been focused on making sure that here in New York 19, we are creating opportunities to be able to keep our young people here. I have the support of a major labor union, the only campaign to be endorsed by a local labor union here in New York 19, the Communication Workers of America. They are standing behind me because of that plan, to make sure that we are creating good jobs in this district, and that's how we should approach any and all trade deals.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
I've spent the better part of my career fighting against unfair trade. I actually shut down an operation in China and moved it back to the United States because of unfair trade. We need to stand up for fair trade, and we need to make sure that labor unions have a seat at the table when we're negotiating trade agreements. It occurs in Germany, where they have very strong labor unions that are part of the process. That's how we're going to ensure that we have fair trade that benefits workers here in our community. But also, I don't like the idea of politicians like Donald Trump using the politics of cynicism in order to go after trade tariffs. For example, this tax on steel and aluminum, which will increase the cost of people here in our community, actually will destroy jobs. That tax on solar panels destroyed 1/3 of the jobs in the renewable industry here in our district. We have to make sure that when we look at how we structure trade deals, it's what's best for our community, what's best for the workers, and most importantly, what's also best for our environment.
Thank you. Mr. Clay.
Back in 2002, George Bush tried a tariff on steel. And you know what happened? we lost 200,000 jobs. Just spotting tariffs off the top of your head isn't the way to conduct international trade. Congress has a responsibility with respect to trade, and we can take control of those issues. Right now, he's claiming, as a national security issue, that he has to cut and actually add tariffs to Canada and Mexico and our allies in Europe. That's antagonistic to everything we stand for and what we believe in. I agree with the fact that international trade needs to be done from the worker perspective. All the trade agreements we've made in the past have been with only the big corporations at the table. The worker has not been considered. The environment has not been held up as high as it should be. That's what we have to fight for. We have to make sure of that from Congress. Thank you.
Mr. Delgado.
So Trump identified a real problem, but his solution is horribly flawed. Going about it unilaterally, going about it without any real thought or coherence to any degree. The fact of the matter, though, is that we have, for an extended period of time, seen workers get left behind, as I spoke about in my intro remarks. And part of the reason why is because, as noted, they have not been included at the table when it comes to devising these trade agreements. And the reason why they have not been included at the table is because the owners of capital, the owners of IP, are the ones who have direct access to our lawmakers. And they have access to our lawmakers because they have wealth and they can pay for that access. And until we get money out of politics and can dictate who and when has access based on the mere fact that they're citizens and not just corporate titans, we're going to be in this position. I also think we have got to get rid of this god-awful practice of fast-track law, where you just through the back door without any real transparency move these bills through or these trade deals through without any real diligence. It is an affront to our democracy and to the working folks in this country.
Mr. Ryan.
So somehow, in one fell swoop, Trump had a twofer. Not only did he turn his back on some of our closest allies and trade partners and blow up the potential for negotiations with others, but he also harmed the vast majority of American workers, including many, many millions of people who voted for him. I truly do not understand what he was doing here other than a sellout to a bunch of his donors and special interests. I agree with my colleagues. Every single trade agreement I would evaluate through the lens of what does it do for workers in our country and what does it do for workers in our district. We know these tariffs are harmful to us here. The other thing I just want to briefly hit on, the larger picture here is Trump's whole economic vision and the Republican Party's is backward looking and reinforcing big corporations. We as Democrats, and I in my campaign, want to put forth a forward-looking economic vision where we train people with the skills they need, we pay people fair living wages, and we move forward in the new economy that's happening around us.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Ms. Collins.
As an economist, a big part of my job is actually analyzing trade and the effects of trade on local economies. So, and another, strikingly, apparently in the 115th Congress, there are no economists. So we are lacking economists right now from our leadership, which to me is absurd, given what an important aspect this is for our country and for our district. So Trump's trade policies are dangerous for two reasons. One, increasing prices, and two, creating uncertainty as our role in the global economy. Raising prices is tariffs. Steel and aluminum, raising prices in steel and aluminum right off the bat for our district is really dangerous because New York is actually ranked 8th in the country for importing steel and aluminum. And by increasing those prices, it automatically increases prices for our agricultural sector because that feeds into a lot of agricultural equipment. So already when our agricultural sector is struggling and costs are too high for them, he has just increased those costs, further hindering our economy. And that doesn't stop at steel and aluminum. As you've all seen, he has now incited a trade war with many of our partners, which will just further increase the prices on other things. And more to come. Okay.
Okay, we're going to move down the line. This is question number 2, and this question will be answered first by Mr. Rhodes. And that question is, the EPA administrator has rolled back or delayed 24 major regulations, including those dealing with climate change. What would you do as a congressman to protect the work of the EPA?
Well, I'll start by calling on John Faso to make sure join the call to fire Scott Pruitt. Elise Stefanik in the North Country, a Republican member of the House, has called on Scott Pruitt to be fired, and John Faso must join that call. But John Faso's record on the environment, we could go on for a long time about how bad it is. A 34% rating from the League of Conservation Voters, taking $10,000 from GE, and then being one of the only Republicans to oppose the cleanup of the Hudson River. And we need a member of Congress who knows why the environment is so important to this community. That is me. I've hiked every peak in the Catskills. I remember striper fishing on the Hudson. I was out in Hillsdale at Debbie's bed and breakfast, the Inn at Green River, and she was telling me how they need now a generator because of these 20-year storms are happening every 10 years, and these 10-year storms are happening every 5 years, and their power is always going out. What I would like to see is a climate change resiliency fund come out of Washington to help our farmers, our small businesses cope with the impact of climate change, because it is driving up the cost of doing business here in New York 19 and across America.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Flynn.
I've been an environmentalist since I was a kid, and in the early 2000s I helped start an organization, Environmental Entrepreneurs, and we actually looked for solutions that would both reduce emissions and create jobs at the same time. And right now we do have an environmental crisis in our country, and John Faso is making it worse. He has voted 8 times to roll back environmental regulations. Many of them would specifically hurt our district and give no benefit, even to the commercial entities. So the first thing we have to do is make sure Congress does its job as a co-equal part of the government and hold the executive branch responsible for actually enforcing the law. That's what Congress is supposed to do, and that's what I'll do when I go to Congress. Second thing is, we have to actually put forward regulations that would help protect us here in our community. Get the PCB out of the rivers. Help solve the problem in Hoosick Falls. Make sure we continue to protect the watershed in our environments while allowing for home rule. We have 3 watersheds in our community in the 19th Congressional District. We also need to look at renewables as a way to create jobs. Renewables create jobs 12 times faster than any other sector. We can protect the environment and create jobs right here in the 19th Congressional District. Thank you.
Mr. Clay.
Environmental degradation is the biggest concern for the Trump administration right now. They are backdooring us at every level. Now, Congress, there is a simple answer to this. The EPA is subject to the legislation that Congress makes. So they can actually enforce the regulations, but Congress can set all the standards. So they are hoisting up a fossil fuel industry and grabbing the last profits from a fossil fuel industry while pouring toxic substances into our air and into our water. We can control that. We can control that with a new Clean Air Act and a new Clean Water Act, and make sure that the fossil fuel industry and all the industries that are trying to deregulate will be responsible to us, the citizens who ultimately have to suffer the consequences of environmental degradation. So I'm going to be going on a 200-mile bike ride, just for everybody's information, and I'm going to be highlighting the environmental concerns throughout our district, many of which is more than a dozen Superfund sites and many more brownfields. That's another issue I want to take on. There's a Superfund pay act that we have to get done. Thank you.
Mr. Delgado.
It continues to blow my mind that we are still having a debate about the reality of climate change. The fact that we even have folks in Congress who feel comfortable still espousing that point of view speaks volumes for how far removed we are from fact-based evidence and the validity and merit of science, which is infectious right now in our culture, and it is making any reasonable conversation on any number of issues very hard to come by. Now, on the question of the environment, the fact of the matter is we have Congress propping up the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $4 billion a year annually in tax incentives and subsidies. Exxon was already paying about 17% of a corporate tax rate before the tax break because it was getting tax subsidies and tax credits. So what can Congress do? How about stop doing those tax credits and subsidies and move them over to the renewable energy space and incentivize investment in renewable energy, from solar to wind to geothermal. Not only do you protect the environment, but you also create jobs along the way.
Mr. Rock.
We've got an existential crisis when the person in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency is a climate denier who's disavowed the whole mission of the organization. So this calls for something fundamentally different. This calls for Congress stepping in to do the role that the executive normally has done pretty darn well. So to me, the way you do that, it's both top down and bottom up. Top down, we got to get rid of Pruitt. We got to get rid of the whole culture of those appointed. Thank you. And then bottom bottom up, this is something that I think is very important. A big part of the job of the representative is amplifying the powerful voices of the people in your community. There are so many activists I see in this room that have fought long and hard for decades to stop the pollution and clean up the pollution in our river, to stop the power line transmissions, to fight against fracking in New York State. A big part of the job is I will be your advocate on the ground in DC to elevate those voices and get funding and resources to back you up. Thank you.
Ms. Conley.
So first of all, we have to actually get someone in Congress that believes climate change is a real thing. Second, we have to have somebody that actually values the environment. John Faso is a pro-fracking lobbyist. We had people come to my farm in Cooperstown and ask us multiple times to frack on our land, and we said, absolutely not. We choose environment over profit, and that's what we need in Congress. We need to protect the Clean Power Plan. That is our best opportunity to combat climate change. That's what requires the huge power plants to reduce their carbon emissions, and Scott Pruitt is trying to roll that back. We need to protect the fuel economy standards that Obama created in 2012. That is the best chance at reducing global warming, and Scott Pruitt is trying to roll that back. We need to make sure that we're extending our federal tax credits that allow people to invest in clean energy, such as the solar tax credit, which is going to start to diminish in 2019 and ends, as of right now, in 2021. We have to have somebody in there that is going to extend that, and we have to have someone in there that is going to value these investments in our clean energy if it's going to happen. Thank you.
Mr. Beals.
We are the people of the Hudson Valley and the Catskills. It is our calling to not only state the crisis that we face in climate breakdown, but to lead our whole country towards its solution. This is not something abstract for me that I need to look at statistics to see, because I have seen climate breakdown with my own eyes on my own family's farm here in the Hudson Valley, which we've had since I'm a child. And the role of the fossil fuel industry in continuing this degradation is not something abstract for me either, because I've seen it going on as a United States diplomat and turned down ExxonMobil when they wanted to hire me to come be a teacher here in our community. What is this crisis? Our crisis is an opportunity. And the opportunity is why I have led this field in taking the off-fossil fuel pledge, calling for a moratorium on these projects so we can pass a Green New Deal, putting people to work so that we can achieve sustainable energy in our district and in our country in the near future. Get us back in the Paris Climate Agreement, fully fund the EPA, and lead the country as we're destined to do. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to move to the third question, and that will be answered first by Mr. Flynn. That question is, what would you propose for helping to ease the shortage of farm workers in this congressional district? In particular, can you suggest changes that would ease the system for farmers who want to hire foreign workers?
Comprehensive immigration reform is one of the top issues of my entire campaign. It's almost like I want to take the Republicans and introduce them to Economics 101. The reason why the U.S. economy grows faster than Japan or Europe is because of immigration. Immigrants overwhelmingly add to the economy. They do not take away jobs, they add jobs. A third of small businesses here in New York State are owned and operated by small businesses. So this talk by John Faso, who he sent out a mailer this week, using the politics of the division, going after immigrants. And the irony is that he actually put a farmer on the mailing list. So he's attacking immigrants and using a farmer. I bet that farmer actually had to shut down his farm this year because of the policies of John Faso. We should not only have guest worker visas, we should actually provide work visas for farm workers so that they can continue to work here and help us grow our economy. That's how we're going to grow the economy and grow a sustainable economy right here in the Hudson Valley. We have to take on John Faso and Donald Trump on this issue, and we have to realize that immigrants are an integral part of our community. It's un-American to think otherwise.
Mr. Flynn. Mr. Flynn.
Immigration is something that has been spoiled at this point. We have a president that's going from abhorrent to cruel and unusual punishment to our immigrant population. That has to change. If you want to get people willing to come on guest worker programs, you have to allow a country that has humanity toward its immigrant population. I've got a good friend who's an organic farmer, and he used to have a good group, 12 people come up every year. All of a sudden they won't come up anymore. they won't bring their families. They're afraid to come here. They're afraid of what's going to happen to them. We need to clean all of that up. We need to take on immigration on top of everything else we're doing. We need a Clean Dreamers Act. We need a way for immigrants who are illegal or who've been here for a period of time to earn their way to citizenship. That's something that we should, a path to citizenship would be something that would change the dynamics, change the climate, and allow immigrants to know that they can come here and they can be safe and their rights will be respected.
Thank you, Mr. Clay. Mr. Delgado.
On the specific point about immigration, I've talked to a number of dairy farmers who've made the point that there is no corollary to the H-2A, which allows seasonal labor to come in and work legally. So the vast majority of folks who are working on an annual basis on dairy farms are undocumented and therefore working illegally. So one of the things that we can do is, in the first instance, at least create or legislate and provide a corollary so that the folks who do come here and that provide the real labor force for our dairy farmers in particular can do so and come out of the shadows and provide a real economic base. But beyond that, it's important to get beyond just the immigration component. Infrastructure is critical. Supporting the food market programs and supporting the food promotion programs and supporting the fact that we have organic cost sharing programs, all of these things are critical to make sure that we can tap into $6 billion right now of unmet demand of local and organically grown food in New York City. We're not tapping into it because we don't have the infrastructure and we're not prioritizing the programs to prop up our workers and make sure that we conserve the ag space and make sure that it's sustainable moving forward.
Mr. Delgado. Mr. Ryan.
As Antonio said, this is multifaceted, so I agree on the immigration side with my colleagues. A Clean Dream Act now is not only the morally right thing to do, but it's right for our economy. And then a pathway to citizenship for the millions of people living in the shadows, again, morally right, economically right. Secondly, we got to talk about how are we going to train and empower the next generation of farmers and farm workers in this district. Talking to a lot of farmers in this area, they're at this transition point of how am I going to hand over my farm and make it sustainable for whoever's going to take it over and allow them to continue to hire workers. So investment in programs to train the next generation of farmers and support them with capital and training. And then finally, there's another very dark side to this, and it really struck me talking to a farmer from here in Columbia County. He said of his 20 farm workers, 18 of them are daily struggling with opioid addiction, daily. And he said, I'm powerless to help them with this problem. So we have to address that. It's all tied together.
Thank you. Ms. Collins.
Coming from a family who's been farming here for 5 generations, growing up on a farm, we still have our working farm, this issue really hits home for me. As far as workers on farms go, farmers absolutely are in favor of keeping immigrants here. They're a really important source of labor on farms right now in our district. I've talked to several farmers who actually go to DC to lobby to congressmen in favor of guest worker programs to make sure that immigrants can stay and continue to work on farms. I hope we come back to immigration because I have a lot to say to that, and to all the Latinos, gracias por escucharme, gracias por venir hoy y tengo un voz por mí. But on farmers, more to say on that, farms are really struggling right now. And this problem has been building and building, and this year it is really exploding. Farms are closing across our district. I can name tons of friends and family friends that have closed their farms this past year. They need help, and Senator Gillibrand has a lot of great proposals out there that I am in support of. A price floor, greater funding for the milk program that supports dairy farmers, tying it to inflation to keep up with their costs. But there's more that we can do, and I have a lot of ideas that I want to do to help farmers.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Mr. Beal.
Farming is our heritage in this district, and it's also our foundation. And that foundation has been slipping away. And that is not a new story. That is a long story. And it's one that has traced over the last decades, where we have gone from 16,000 farms in the Hudson Valley down to about 4,000. And that is how you create opioid addiction, by the way. That is how you displace a vast labor force. You displace the safeguards of our environment, the best employers of local labor, and the best producers of the goods that can actually lead to healthy and happy lives for the people of our home. Who is the culprit? The same as so many of these issues. Corporate power. Many of the dairy farmers losing their way in our district are being driven out of business by giant agribusiness, even as they pursue their lives and their trades and find no place for their own product on the shelves here. We have to help them, and when standing up to them and for them, we're going to make a difference for our home. And the same goes for these migrant laborers they work with.
Thank you, Mr. Beals. Mr. Rose.
Let's be crystal clear what the problem is here. We have a president whose entire immigration policy is very simple. If you're white, you're welcome. If you're not, you're not. And that is the root of this problem. Until we fix that, we will never be able to fix this issue. I grew up working on a farm down in Ulster County. I know families that have been coming to this congressional district for generations. They attend our churches, go to our schools. Many didn't come this last year because maybe someone got a traffic ticket. And this goes beyond just farming. I was out in Spencertown and a contractor came to one of our events, and he was talking about that he spent $25,000 in legal fees for his workers just last year, people who are here legally. Rensselaer County, they have deputized the sheriffs in Rensselaer County as deputy ICE agents here in New York 19. And this goes beyond just economics. The reporting of sexual harassment in the immigrant community has dropped dramatically since Donald Trump became president, because we have so many of our neighbors who are scared to call the police because of fear of deportation. This is wrong, and it can only stop once we fix this policy in command of Washington.
Thank you. We're now going to move to audience questions, and I would like to just tell you that those of you who bought tickets and submitted a question may very well now hear your question asked. So we're going to move for this question to Mr. Flynn first, and this question comes from the audience. I believe that's it. Oh, I'm sorry, you did. Oh, Mr. Clegg, I do apologize. I apologize. Oh, absolutely, Mr. Clegg. Oh, all right, Mr. Clegg. The many valuable members of the Congressional District 19 are disenfranchised due to policies resulting in increased income inequality. Please identify one area of income inequality and explain how you would address it.
Just want to start off by saying that Mr. Flynn always likes to go first, but maybe not this time.
Lots of candidates.
Income inequality. It starts off, any economist, anybody looking to expand the economy looks for education first. So I'm somebody who believes really strongly in education, starting at the beginning. One, we have to have childcare. Childcare is one of the most important things we can do to support young families. The cost of childcare is something that's almost unaffordable for most young families. It's so important. We don't pay the people who provide the care well enough, and we don't allow it to be affordable. That's a change. Early child education is another thing. Let's fully fund our public education system. Let's get college and community college working. Let's do the training for the manufacturing that's in our district. Let's have that cooperation between private and public. And let's find a way to get rid of student debt so that people aren't afraid to go to college. And let's provide tuition-free college for everybody. All those things will be a transformational moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clegg. Mr. Delgado.
The way we can deal with income inequality in the very first instance is to repeal that god-awful tax scam. Because what that did was just throw fire on, or gasoline I should say, on the fire. And move away from this god-awful practice or theory of trickle-down economics, which continues to fail us time and time again and has led us into a financial crisis of the sort I hadn't seen in my entire lifetime. So what does that mean? Well, one, we can repeal the tax bill and begin to close corporate loopholes and make sure that corporations pay what they're obligated to pay under the law. We do that, share in our prosperity, and build infrastructure, create roads, rail, broadband access, cell service, and pay meaningful wages to our workers. The other big piece of this is gender income inequality. Women continue to make 80 cents on the dollar. African American women make 67 cents on the dollar. So the first order of business for me would be to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. We do that, I think we can also begin to deal with the level of income inequality that we're seeing in way too many areas across this country.
Mr. Delgado. Mr. Ryan.
We all know this, and I directly believe that the highest level of income inequality in my lifetime and all of our lifetimes is the direct cause of why we have Donald Trump in office. Because both parties, for too long, have fundamentally failed to tackle this issue. As the son of a public school teacher, my mom taught her whole career in Kingston City schools and one of the most challenged, underserved schools in our district. I agree with Dave that it all starts with arming and educating our young people with the skills that they need to compete in the economy that we know is changing around us. So some specific things that I want to do there. Number one, we have to protect and increase funding for our public schools, particularly in light of the insidious attack led from the top by Betsy DeVos. Number two, for higher education, we have to fundamentally re-envision how we're going to do this in our country. 70% of our young people here in this district don't finish college. We need more pathways for them to good jobs. Thank you.
Ms. Collins.
Again, as an economist, I can tell you that we can have economic growth, and it doesn't mean that it is inclusive or distributed fairly across our society, and that is exactly what is happening. Yes, the stock market is booming, and that disproportionately benefits the wealthiest Americans. The Republicans are giving tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans and a $1.5 trillion tax cut to the biggest corporations, and meanwhile cutting Medicaid by almost 25% and trying to cut SNAP benefits. That's specifically targeting low-income and vulnerable populations, people that are already struggling to get by, and they're just making it harder for them. There's economic research out there. It is well known that if you help the middle and low income, that is where you get well-distributed and the strongest economic growth. So we need to make sure that we are helping the middle and low-income families. We need to reverse those tax breaks, and we also need to make good investments such as infrastructure and education, and make sure that those are public resources available to everybody, and so that everybody has the opportunity to access good-paying jobs.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Mr. Beals.
If you work a job, you should be able to afford a home, afford the health care for your family, afford a car, afford to put something away for retirement, and have something left on the side. And if you can't do that off of one job, then the economy is rigged against you. We have to return to that fundamental truth because we've lost sight of it. And we're losing sight of it now too when we talk about education and job training as the answer to income inequality. When income inequality's core source is not the lack of skills among hard-working Americans in our district, but the incomparable corporate greed and power centered on a Wall Street that now has a chokehold on our economy and is hoarding too much money in too few hands, such that the people here working for it can't get it. What's the answer? The answer right now is to pass a federal jobs guarantee so that people looking for work can get meaningful work and be put to work doing the jobs that need doing in our society at a reasonable wage with reasonable benefits. When we do that, we'll change this reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beals. Mr. Rhodes.
I think the problem here is you have the people who are making these decisions in Congress and in government often haven't lived the life of a normal American. The average wealth of a member of Congress today, $1 million, 18 times the annual income of a family here in New York 19. This I know when I got out of high school, I went out and got a job. I wasn't able to afford a car. I biked to work, when I saved up, I managed to have the money to buy a car. But to me, having heard so many stories similar to that, and having known what that is like, is why investing in public transit in this district is so important to me. Delaware County, across the river, 8th largest county in New York State. It's bigger than the state of Rhode Island. There's not a single public transportation system in that county. That is not the outlier. That is across this entire district. We lack a real public transportation infrastructure. I want to make sure that a young person up in New Lebanon or in Canaan or beyond can take a bus down here to go to Columbia Green Community College, can be able to access our hospital without having to own a car. That's why I'm going to make sure we fight for an infrastructure bill and invest in public transit here in New York 19.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn.
Income inequality and despair is the pain that Trump preyed upon and got him elected. So if you all want to stop Trump, you do want to stop Trump, right? Yeah, just checking. All right, then we have to solve those problems that allowed Trump to happen. And that's what my entire campaign is about. We have a plan for the American worker. And it's about creating jobs and raising wages, but also removing the barriers that have kept people down. It's about economic justice and social justice at the same time. It starts with Medicare for All, which is the #1 employer. Healthcare is the #1 employer in this county and 10 of the 11 counties in this district. It enables people to pay less for their healthcare and get more jobs in our community. It includes investments that create jobs in renewables. It includes comprehensive immigration reform. It includes policies that enable and empower women in the workforce and end the culture of assault on women and girls. It's policies that support unions, because there's nothing that does more for pay transparency and equal pay than a strong labor movement. And you cannot have a strong middle class without a strong labor movement. It includes investments in infrastructure, but it also includes prioritizing public education, because that's the only way we're going to grow this economy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move to the second audience question. That will be for you, Mr. Delgado. That question is, what is your opinion of how the War Powers Act is being implemented, and what do you plan to do about it?
So we've had a problem with Congress abdicating its responsibilities here. To be honest, since 9/11, when we authorized the use of force in response to, obviously, the tragedy that we all had to endure. But here we are now, decades later, and our president and presidents before have continued to use that authorization to wield power and to wield might without any basis in most cases, and at the expense and lives of our soldiers and our veterans. It is important that we first and foremost revisit that authorization, and I'd argue do away with it, and make sure that Congress steps up and reclaims its responsibility and obligations as well defined under the articles of our Constitution. And that would be something that I would take on first and foremost. And if we do that, I think we can begin to have real check on the executive branch and make sure that we are leading not with our might, but with our values all across this world.
Thank you, Mr. Delgado. Mr. Ryan.
This is deeply personal to me. It's one of the core reasons I'm running. I have been on the receiving end of an order to go to a war that I didn't think we should have started. And this has been happening not just since September 11th, but way before then. A lot of you have been part of that and witness to that. And it's because we are fundamentally out of whack in the way that the Constitution was designed. The Congress has absconded their responsibility, and the executive has basically a blank check to start wars wherever and whenever they want. One of the core reasons I'm running is because we need more democratic voices who can say with experience and authority and expertise that war has to be the last resort. After I served, I came home and went to grad school at Georgetown to try to figure out, in a security studies program, how can we do this better than what I just did and what I just saw, where too many friends and others were lost. That is a core value I will bring to the job as a representative, and especially now under Trump, it's more important than ever.
Ryan. Ms. Collier.
This really highlights the importance and the imperativeness of following due process. And it is something that our president and executive branch continues to evade and completely deny and completely fail to do. And it's really dangerous for us. You know, as somebody who has worked on USAID projects, this is under part of diplomacy for the US government. I've seen firsthand and I have worked firsthand seeing how important it is that we have diplomacy and not just defense, and that we have a government that has a system of checks and balances. Working on diplomacy programs, working for food security for the US government, those programs really matter and really affect our national security. And it can't just be about defense. The projects that I worked on, Obama, of course, was very supportive of, and under his administration, he made sure we're well supported. And of course, they are projects that Trump continues to try to cut as he tries to ramp up defense and cut all of our diplomacy. And that is a mistake and really puts us at danger.
Mr. Beals.
We approach this month the anniversary of the day that Robert F. Kennedy was struck down. And his words come to mind when I think about this question, because he once said, "Don't just pray for peace, seek it, and make your enemy your brother." That's what I have tried to live in my life. I was a United States diplomat, pushing for peace in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, pushing for peace in a war zone in Iraq. And if elected, I would be the only former United States diplomat in Congress, and one of the most experienced foreign policy voices in the entirety of the United States Congress, after a career that stretched over the course of a decade pushing for peace. And it's off of that experience that I tell you now, and I speak to the anti-war activists and the peacemakers who have rallied to my campaign, that militarism is not the answer for the United States, and that peace, which seems so elusive in the Middle East and elsewhere, is possible if we dare to advocate it and if we dare to push for it following our ideals. The authorized use of military force has become a blank check for war. Instead, we should follow the course of peace. Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes.
Nearly 50 years ago, the War Powers Act passed Congress on a very simple premise, that the President should go to Congress to get permission to go to war. Just like it says in the Constitution, Congress shall declare war. Clearly, it is not being enforced because today we are still operating under the same AUMF that passed Congress shortly after 9/11. Here we are 17 years later. I would make sure in Congress that we fight to pass a new AUMF. The President is forced to come back to the American people for permission to come to Congress to make sure that Congress is saying something before we engage overseas. So why isn't this being enforced? Because we elect politicians like John Faso who take $10,000 from a man named John Bolton, $10,000, and cannot stand up to him when he's elected, when he is appointed National Security Advisor. Because we have people like John Faso on the Budget Committee. So when Trump proposes increasing Defense Department spending, but cutting the State Department spending, he is absolutely silent. That is the root of the problem. Until we get these warmongers like John Faso out of office, nothing will change.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Ryan, plan.
Thank you, Barbara. Like many of you, back in 2003, I marched against the Iraq War because I knew it was an unjust war. This is personal to me. My brother was killed by terrorists, in large part as a retaliation for a president that acted without authorization, for a president that attacked another country without the approval of Congress. They responded by killing my brother and 188 other Americans. And the way I responded to that was I didn't say that we should start a war. I went to Congress and helped pass bipartisan legislation, the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act. And we achieved justice and security through sanctions and diplomacy. And that's what we need to do right now in America. The War Powers Act was passed in 1973 in order to hold a check on executives like Donald Trump, and our Congress has failed. I would start with today rescinding that authorization for use of military force, and I would also modify the War Powers Act so that this never happens again. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clay.
We have a delusional megalomaniac president. It has never been more important that Congress exercise its constitutional right over war powers. Yes, back 3 days after 9/11, we passed the AUMF, the authorization to use military force. You know how many times it's been used since then? 16 different times in 16 different countries. It gives free license to a president like Donald Trump, who uses his bulliness. He is a big bully, and he uses our military might in order to push people around, and all it does is destroy things. We have destroyed the Middle East. The war in Iraq was a preemptive war that was unjust and never should have happened. We are using military might where we should be using diplomacy. We all know that. We all know that we need to rely on statesmanship and our allies. And to make the world safer, that's what we have to do. We have to be supported by our allies and not condemning them and not running away from them.
Thank you, Mr. Clay. All right, we're going to go to the last audience question, and that will be started first by Mr. Bryan. That question is, considering the President's veto power, what next steps will you propose in order to provide health care for all?
So the first step, given his veto powers, we have to take back the House of Representatives in 2018. I mean, this is, I'm going to talk about, clearly that's why we're all here. But we got to talk about the way forward. But first, let's be clear. And I've heard this knocking on the over 40,000 doors we've knocked on. People are afraid and scared that they're going to lose the coverage they have right now, albeit imperfect. Medicare, people covered under the Affordable Care Act, people covered by their employers and the exchanges. So number one, we've got to hold the ground that we fought hard to get under the Affordable Care Act. Going forward, I think we're all united in a vision of universal coverage. The specific plan that I propose, which I think we could get done and initiated in a democratically controlled House, lower the Medicare age to 55, under 55, create an opt-in to that same Medicare plan to bring down prices, and then for the love of God, give us the power to negotiate prescription drug prices and bring those costs down.
Ms. Collins.
We have a healthcare crisis. Our costs are too high and our system is too complicated. A lot of people, a lot of families are really just one bankruptcy, one health crisis away from going bankrupt. I have a family member in this district who has health insurance through an employer, and when he had his kid born at our hospital in our district, he paid over $5,000 out of pocket. That's a lot of money for a lot of families. It's too much money. We have people in our district that have serious health care concerns and are unable to go to a doctor because they can't afford it. That is unacceptable to me. I believe that healthcare is a human right and it's not a privilege, and that everyone should have healthcare no matter your income, your gender, your age. If you have a pre-existing condition, everyone should have healthcare. So for that reason, I stand for Medicare for All, because Medicare for All does ensure and guarantee universal healthcare coverage. It makes sure everybody has healthcare. It also addresses the healthcare costs that we have in our system and that are the real crisis that's happening. Thank you.
Mr. Beals.
We have a health crisis in our district, and making profits off of sick people is wrong. And that is why I support Medicare for All, and I do not believe in compromise when lives are on the line, because that is the situation we face in our home. I've been leading this fight for Medicare for All since the first day that I kicked off this campaign, and maybe that's why John Faso just released an attack on me that I'll share with you all. He said, quote from his office, "Unabashedly progressive Jeff Beals doubles down on single-payer healthcare scheme." I want to answer this charge. It's not a scheme. It's a national government health program like that enjoyed in the rest of the industrialized world that we have been denied for too long, John Faso. And I'm not doubling down on it because this isn't a card game. There are people's lives at stake, and those lives have to be saved, and we formed a government to provide for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and the general welfare. And right now, at this moment, you know who's on government-run healthcare? John Faso. And I want him off of it and us on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lowe.
I support Medicare for All for many reasons, and I could go through the numbers. The fact that we spend 18% of our economy on healthcare, and we are 37th in results across the globe. There's many different reasons. But the question is, what will we do in the interim while President Trump is still in office and he will veto H.R. 676 or whatever goes through? Here's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to make sure we have a federal representative who also really knows state government well, because we can get DOH grants here in our community. We're seeing, I was recently at the Columbia Memorial Hospital, seeing what they're doing to bring that new mammogram detection service right here to Columbia County. We have to make sure that we're bringing funding to support, we have 2 counties in this district that don't have a single maternity ward. We have to bring much more funding from the federal, from the state government, to make sure that our local health centers are being expanded, not shrunk, to be able to provide essential services in our community. John Faso, when he ran, he promised twice, I think, that he would not vote to defund Planned Parenthood. He then turned around and within 5 months voted twice to defund Planned Parenthood.
Thank you very much.
So we have to use our own donations here in this community to support our local Planned Parenthoods all across New York County.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn.
I'm thrilled to see that 5 of the 7 candidates here support Medicare for All, which I've been advocating for since 2004. And the reason why is that healthcare is a right, not a privilege, and Medicare makes the most sense. It will enable us to save costs, to spend less on healthcare, we'll get better coverage, have better health outcomes, and create more jobs in our community. And I'm going to convince Republicans to support this, because it's going to take the burden off of small businesses. It's going to take the burden off of individuals who are struggling to pay for healthcare, and it's going to create jobs in our community. So I don't care if Donald Trump is the president, we're going to continue to fight for this, and we will not equivocate on this issue. And there is a big difference between Medicare for All and universal coverage. John Faso supports universal coverage, a vague understanding of a system that is based on employer-based healthcare. Employers being involved in your health insurance, frankly, it's creepy. They're not involved in your car insurance. Why are they involved in your health insurance? It doesn't make any sense. I understand how it started in the 1940s, but we can convince people to support this. It's the right thing to do, and we should not compromise on it. Thank you.
Mr. Clay.
I will join in the chorus for Medicare for all. I had an experience back 36 years ago when my daughter was born, and we got in a COBRA program, and the insurance policy that we had was picked up during the pregnancy. So when it turned out she had life-saving problems at birth, the insurance company decided that it was a pre-existing condition. I will never, ever forget that an insurance company put their profit over my daughter's life. We need to take profit out of the healthcare system. $450 billion a year is spent on profit and on administrative overhead that doesn't need to be there. We could put that all to care. We could provide care for every person in this country and provide it for less than we spend in healthcare right now in this country. Why don't we do it? Because special interests are in the middle. It requires congresspersons who are willing not to be beholden to special interests, not to worry about the pharmaceutical industry or the for-profit health industry, but willing to do what's best for all of you. Thank you.
Mr. Delgado.
I have to disagree. John Faso does not believe in universal health care. John Faso believes in taking health care away from the most vulnerable amongst us. John Faso wants to keep the profit motive exactly where it is right now in our healthcare system. John Faso has no problem with the fact that Medicare cannot negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry. This is a serious issue, very serious. As pointed out, lives are on the line, but we must take this issue seriously and deal with it with grave respect. Now, how do we do that? We've got to fight, and fight with all of our might to get the profit motive out of the healthcare system and fight toward a Medicare for all system. But a critical step, if we're going to make sure we achieve this, is, in my opinion, to provide everybody an opportunity to choose to opt in to Medicare. By providing that choice, you allow folks to keep what they have if they like it, but still fight for universal health care. You drive down premiums, you drive down deductibles, and you also make sure, as noted, that Medicare can negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry. These are all achievable measures. And if we achieve these measures, we have transformative change in our healthcare system.
Mr. Delgado. We are now going to move to what we call the challenge round. This is which the Democratic committees from both Columbia County and Chatham came up with to give the candidates an opportunity to ask one another questions. So names were drawn out of a bowl, and they were drawn alphabetically, and so we're going to start alphabetically, and we're going to start with, and what I would suggest is each one of you pick up a microphone. We're going to start with Jeff Beals, who indeed, I believe, drew Garth Rhodes' name. Yes, so if the two of you would stand up and take a microphone, and you get 1 minute to ask the question and 1 minute to respond. So, you get to ask the question, yes. So Mr. Beals, you get to ask Mr. Rhodes a question, and Mr. Rhodes, you get a minute to respond to that answer.
Thank you. Okay, so I won't use a minute. I'll just ask it quick. We have a Garrett. Good being here with you. We have a big gubernatorial primary going on in our district right now, and I'd love to know, because you've had experience in state government working for the governor, who you'll vote for. Will it be Governor Cuomo or Cynthia Nixon?
Absolutely. I'm proud to be the only candidate on this stage who has worked in government here in New York State. I grew up working on a farm down in Ulster County. First, my family would go to college. Had the opportunity at a very young age, in my early 20s, offered to work for the governor of the state that I grew up in. It was an opportunity I took very quickly. I was proud to have experience here working out in the Catskill Mountains after Hurricane Irene. And I will vote for the current governor. I'll vote for Governor Cuomo, and I'll tell you why. I'm concerned about the issue of the property tax cap coming up again. I saw that Cynthia Nixon was saying that she was possibly in support of it, and I don't want to see what happened last time around, where that became a huge issue in the campaign, all up and down the ballot, saying the Democrats want to raise property taxes. I think the ideal scenario here is having Cuomo on the Democratic line, Cynthia Nixon on the Working Families Party line, and one of us on both lines. That will make sure that we get the strongest Democratic turnout across New York 19 and send Faso packing this fall.
Thank you very much. now we're going to move to Dave Clegg, who will ask his question of Aaron Collier.
Don't I say so?
Oh, you get, I'm sorry, oh, this is confusing for me too. You get a minute to respond to his answer.
I think we need a change in the Democratic Party's leadership, and I think we need a change in our State House, and I'll tell you why. Many of the crises that are facing us right now, Democrats talk a good game on, but when it comes time for action, I don't think we take it. We have faced the problem of income inequality for 40 years right now, but we haven't arrested its slide, even at times when we've controlled both houses of Congress, even at times when we've controlled the governorship. That's because I think big money rules our politics and big donors rule our politics. We've had a climate breakdown crisis going on for many years now, but we haven't arrested it, even at a time when the governor has passed no fracking in New York State. A lot of people don't know that every year since, we've increased the import of frack gas into our state. We are not taking the dramatic steps we need to take advantage of these crises, turn them into opportunities, and really act and lead as Democrats. And that's what I think we have a moment here to do. You know, there's an unofficial slogan for my campaign, and it's called "Never Let a Good Crisis Go to Waste."
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Collier and Dave Clegg. Dave Clegg will ask the question, and then you get a minute, and then he gets it.
Ms. Collier, as the only woman in the race, I'd like to ask you a question about women. And that would be something that combines the really concerning issue of domestic violence and guns in this country. A woman is 16 times more likely in this country to be harmed by a gun than any other industrialized country in the world. What is your position about that, and what would you do to remedy it?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. Because I don't think women's issues came up yet in any of the questions, so thank you for that. Yeah, obviously, I feel very strongly about women's rights and women's issues and standing up for women's and giving women a voice. There is systemic gender inequality in our country, and it's seen here in domestic violence and in domestic violence situations. Obviously, you know, women, gun safety is also of an utmost concern and a really big issue for our district and for our country. As we've seen, we just had the 22nd gun shooting in our country this year, which is absurd, and something needs to be done now to address that. We absolutely have to put a ban on assault weapons. We must put a ban on bump stocks. We must have longer waiting periods. We have to get NRA money out of our politics so that something is done, and as long as we have congressmen like John Faso taking money from NRA, nothing is going to get done. And again, standing up for addressing gender inequalities is really at the root of women's disposition in this particular situation. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Clay.
Women who are subjected to domestic violence are the most vulnerable in our country. It's a sad and tragic experience that too many experience. Believe it or not, 4.5 million people who are women who are now living have been exposed to guns by their male intimate partner, whether they've been shot or they've been threatened by it. We have to change that. There's 22 states in this country that don't remove the guns from convicted stalkers and convicted abusers of domestic violence. That has to change. We can do that on a federal level. We can make sure that anybody who's ever, even on a temporary restraining order, that person has to have their guns removed. We have to provide for due process, but we also have the right to confiscate guns from anyone who's been violent toward women. And you know, 54% of the people who committed mass murders started with their intimate partner. We have to do something about violence toward women, and that's something we can address from Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Clay. Okay, Ms. Collier, stay where you are.
Yeah.
Because you are going to ask the next question of Mr. Delgado.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Antonio, why do you, for healthcare, why do you support public option instead of Medicare for all?
Right, so I think it's important to understand that we all share the same principles here, and that is universal health care. That is that the profit motive ought not be in our healthcare system. The reason why I have chosen to focus first and foremost on what is achievable is because I think I have a responsibility as a congressman to do that. And to make sure that we are building real consensus around a critical, paramount issue that needs to be resolved against a Congress right now that is controlled by Republicans who are determined to take it away from us. And so thinking critically and responsibly and diligently about the ways in which we can achieve this step by first and foremost allowing folks to opt in to Medicare, allows folks to take on this fight without feeling like the change is too fast or too much at one time, and allows folks to keep their health care if they want to and still join the fight for universal health care. To me, that is a responsible way to take on a very important, very critical issue that must have a solution at the end of the day.
Thank you.
So for me, there's the important difference between public option and Medicare for all. Again, Medicare for all ensures everyone and gives health care coverage to everyone. Public option is basically almost what we have now, private and public options. And a really big part of Medicare for all is that it not only gives health care to everybody, but also by eliminating the inefficiencies of having multiple systems, really reduces the cost. Right now, medical offices have entire staff, entire teams just to deal with all of those options and all of that paperwork, and that is such a huge inefficiency in our system that adds such a margin of cost, and Medicare for all takes that out. And that is really, I think, a really important point. I also want to take an opportunity to say, you know, for women's health, we see the Republicans attacking women's health and trying to restrict women's health, and again, Medicare for all, making sure that all health care is provided for all people, I think is really important, again, to rebuttal against that. Another important aspect is CHIP. Children's health care comes up every 10 years and is renegotiated and redebated in a Medicare for all system that will no longer be an issue.
Thank you, Ms. Collier. Okay, now, Mr. Delgado, stay where you are, and you will be asking your question of Mr. Flynn.
So a number of issues have come up today. I've heard you talk about a lot of things, but I did want to hear you speak a little bit about today criminal justice reform and what you think are some of the critical issues that we could be prioritizing to deal with what we know is a justice system that is actually criminal in and of itself.
Thank you, that's a great question. My plan for the American worker, as I talked about, includes removing those barriers that have kept people down, and I think reform of our criminal justice system, including the legalization of marijuana, which will enable us to remove a lot of racial and economic disparities in how our justice is meted out, is one of it. I also want to end private prisons, the cash-based bail system, to ensure we have restorative justice, and the mandatory sentences. What the result of the criminal justice system, the corruption of it, is the result of years of politicians not having the political will and courage, and it is systemically discriminatory against communities of color. And it's something we haven't done nearly enough about as Democrats and as a country.
Yes, and I think it's important to understand what has been happening to young people of color. As an attorney, I did a lot of work with juvenile lifers, young men who were locked up for 20, 30 years when they were juveniles, serving mandatory life sentences under a law that at one point was legal and constitutional until deemed unso by the Supreme Court in 2012. We have got to do the work now to not only make sure that we roll back mandatory sentences or give judges discretion, we also have to make sure that our public defenders are funded. We have to make sure that the community that polices reflects the community that is doing the policing up. We have to make sure that our law enforcement receives properly racial bias training. We need bail reform. The fact of the matter is we got 60% of folks right now in the state of New York that are locked up having been found guilty of nothing. What happened to innocence until proven guilty? So bail reform is a critical step in this direction as well. We do these types of things, I think we can fully restore justice to our criminal justice system.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're going to move to Mr. Flynn, who will be asking a question of Mr. Clay.
Dave's going to finally tell everyone the truth about who actually won our one-on-one basketball game. But before you do that, let's assume I'm lucky enough to win. And I'm going to come to you for your advice on what you want me to concentrate on. The reason why you're running. What would you tell me that's really important to you, and then how could you help me execute against it? Because if I'm lucky enough to win, I would want to make sure that you're still part of it and you're a partner in it. So what would you tell me?
Thank you, thank you. Who won the arm wrestling?
You also won that. This is terribly embarrassing.
So, you know, as I look at this whole system, we want a lot of things that are important. We want to protect the environment. We want Medicare for all. We want to get good jobs. We want to get higher paying jobs. We want to deal with income inequality. But in Congress, one of the starting places that I see is campaign finance reform. We have a corrupt system. We do.
Do I ask him?
So what would you do about that?
Great. It's interesting. Ending Citizens United, everyone keeps talking about the fact that we need to wait for a new Supreme Court. We don't need to do that. We can start making changes right now on the requirements of disclosures. And the second thing is, we as candidates can start standing up and saying, we won't take corporate PAC money. We will actually tell the super PACs to stay out of our races, especially here in primary races. We will stand up and say, I will only take money from people who support what you believe in. We all work for you. We don't work for anybody else. And if somebody wants to donate to our campaigns, that's great, but it's got to be in line with what you want us to do. Because when we go to Washington, we only work for you. And that is a big difference between the way we're approaching our campaign and the way John Faso approaches his campaign. He's going to go to Washington representing the special interest. You can look at every vote that he has done. He never votes what's best for you or anybody in his constituency. Look what he did on the reciprocity bill that you brought up to him the other day. Right? That bill, that gun reciprocity bill, which only benefits people in other states, does nothing but put us all at risk and put our criminal justice system at risk, put people like Pete Baldwin at risk. That's the type of thing we need to stop. We need to have politics. I'm done. This is getting going. All right.
Okay, I know that's what the timekeeper tells me. Okay, Mr. Rhodes, you are going to ask a question of Pat Ryan. You each get a minute. And
Pat,
question.
Two fellow Kingston High School graduates here on stage. Go Tigers. Pat, I just wanted to, I've been out trying my campaign, trying to travel to many different towns and cities in this district, kind of hear what the local issues are of concern to the people in various communities. What are in your mind are the top 3 issues facing the city of Hudson here, and what would be your plan for that?
Okay. Thank you, Gareth. And I got to say, I mean, everybody on this stage, I have nothing but the deepest respect for the work ethic and the amount of just blood, sweat, and tears that we've all put into this. And Gareth in particular, I mean, you are hustling, man, so I agree, and I give you a lot of credit. I think I only have probably 45 seconds left. I'm going to pick one that I've tried to focus on explicitly, and this is in all of our schools and in all of our streets here in this district, the epidemic of gun violence. I have heard from so many parents, students, teachers, that they have this feeling in the pit of their stomach walking into schools where they're supposed to be there to learn, not to live in fear. This is something where we know in this country the right policy solutions. Assault weapons ban. Repealing the Dickey Amendment, universal background checks, all these things have tremendous support across this country. What's lacking is the moral courage to stand up and aggressively speak to this issue, and that's what we did in my first TV campaign ad, calling on all folks in this country to take action.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Pat, I agree with you very much on the importance of common sense gun safety reform. So one thing I've heard here in Hudson often, many times, and also in other localities across our community, is the need for affordable housing. We have seen an extraordinary economic renaissance across this entire community. I've seen it in Kingston, we've seen it here in Hudson. I remember coming up to Warren Street, there was plywood up and down, and it's great to see our community come back the way it has. But one of my priorities is making sure that we see on Columbia Street, we start to make sure that all our boats are being lifted with the tide. And then we make sure we fight for affordable housing. We stand up and oppose gentrification. We stand up and make sure that small businesses are coming into our community, not just on Warren Street, but beyond as well. That's something that has been a priority of my campaign. It's not just low-income housing, it's middle-income housing. We have middle-income taxpayers in this community that are being squeezed and being forced out. We have to create more opportunities from them. Oakland, New Orleans, other municipalities have done this in a very smart way, and I want to see that done on the local level here in Hudson and in cities and small towns across this district.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Okay, for our last challenge round, Pat Ryan will be talking to Jeff.
Very quick thank you. This is actually a really fun format, so thank you for doing this. So Jeff, I'm actually going to steal a page. We had this with one other form of Udell. I'm going to steal Brian Flynn. I got to give you credit on this. This is, I think, the best form of this question. Jeff, I deeply respect you, and I am ready to work for you if you're our candidate and anyone else on this stage. Assuming I'm fortunate enough to be elected by the great people here and across the district, how would you make the case for Pat Ryan against John Faso? What are my And Brian does get credit. I'll give him credit. That was a brilliant question.
This question is usually phrased as, that's enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? I would hope that, I think what's unique about the two of us standing here is the two of us also stood together in a distant land. We didn't know each other then, but we served in Iraq at the same time. And when I first met Pat, and found out that he had not only served in Iraq, but been in Mosul, which was one of the worst places to be in Iraq, it hit me deeply, because there we were, standing in Greene County at a cocktail party, talking about a horrific experience in a horrific place. So the case that I would urge you to make would be to stand up for that experience, be a witness to what you saw and what you stood for bravely, and never forget it when people like John Faso, day after day, take money in the amount of $10,000 from John Bolton's PAC, a man that I saw firsthand drive us to war and that you suffered to serve him.
Thank you very much. Can't see who it is. Mr. Beals, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. And I agree. When we first met, I felt that same bond. Look, I guess I'll make my case very quickly to add to Jeff's good case. We got a hard decision in 22 days. You all have a very hard decision. What I think we've heard tonight is generally encouraging, pretty broad agreement from articulate, compassionate voices to fight for democratic and progressive policies, to stand up for taking our country back from Donald Trump. And that's what this all boils down to me. This district, we all know, is one of the top 10 in the country. We have to win this on the path to take 24 seats, to take back the House, and have the first check on the president and his dangerous, disastrous agenda. I got in this race because I am a progressive, and I believe I can win and take those values and translate them across this district and bring us together. And I'm encouraged by the fact that a poll we ran a few weeks ago validates that. Of the front runners in the race, I was the only candidate who beat John Faso in a general election matchup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Because they all did so well, we actually have time, if I can see the clock properly, for one last question. This is a question, we are not going to have closing statements, but this question may very well get at some of that. This last question will start again with Ms. Collier, because you didn't get a question to start with. So the last question is, please describe one experience that is unique to you that makes you the best choice to win this primary.
Only one?
Only time for one.
Oh my goodness. Boy, that's a tough one. Okay, I will pick growing up poor in this community. That there's so much that comes with that. As I mentioned, I grew up on a farm, poor. My family's been farming here for 5 generations. We've lived here for 8 generations. And that means that we qualified for reduced lunches. My parents worked second jobs. I started working when I was 14 years old. I waitressed for almost 8 years to put myself through college, and put myself through college with waitressing and student loans. I know what those challenges are like. I know what it's like to go without health care. Those are challenges that we all face every day. And I think it's really important that more working class individuals are in Congress. We have a Congress that is dominated by wealthy elites and very disconnected from the challenges that we face. And I think it really makes a leader better if they know, if they've lived through those experiences, if they know what those challenges are like themselves. That makes a leader be able to fix them, and it makes a leader who chooses people over profit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Beals.
How are you going to choose between all these great options? If all you want is to turn an R to a D, If all you think that has gone wrong is the awful reign of John Faso and this president, then you have second choices. But if you think what's gone wrong is 40 years of rampant income inequality and the corporate takeover of our political system and our own congressmen, then I'd suggest you only have one choice, and that's the campaign that I'm running. I'm running that campaign based off of one experience, and I'm not going to list you my experiences fighting in Washington over the course of a decade as a U.S. government servant or my experiences in the classroom. I'll tell you the experience of going out to shoot the video to tell the story of my campaign and meeting Marlene Alfieri, a woman in our district who lives in a mobile home, and told me that she was desperately in need of Medicare for All because the ground was dropping out behind her. And she told me that if her husband really had one stroke, they might lose their home. Well, in the course of this campaign, he did have that stroke. Marlene lost her home, and I'm running this to fight for her.
Thank you. Mr. Rhodes.
Well, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I had an experience this morning. I was actually invited to be the keynote commencement speaker down at CUNY at my alma mater, and it was a moving experience for me, looking out at graduates and thinking, just sitting there. When I graduated from college, a lot of immigrants, most of the people of the students were first in their families to graduate from college. Many were single parents who were commuting hours to go to school. The amount of joy in that room, the amount of excitement, the amount of gratefulness for the opportunities that this country had provided them, CUNY graduates, thanks to Pell Grants, thanks to TAP Aid, and coming up back here today for this, I kept thinking, I can never forget where I come from. I can never forget this community, the community that gave me this opportunity to become the first in my family to go to school. And the reason that I'm running is I want to make sure that that opportunity is there for so many more of our young people growing up like I did here in this district. And that's why I know that I will fight harder than anyone else to make sure that we have jobs for young people in this district. We're fighting for affordable college education, student debt relief, and so much more. Thank you.
Mr. Clayton.
Thank you all for being here. I've learned that when ordinary people come together in rooms like this, we can accomplish extraordinary things against impossible odds. Look, when my brother was killed by terrorists in 1988, I was just a teenager, like those kids down in Florida. But in that moment, everything changed for me. Together with other families, we took on major corporations, we took on special interests, we even took on our own government to demand that justice be done, and we didn't stop until we won. But we did it coming together, not apart. That's the American ideal. And Donald Trump and John Faso, they've used income inequality and despair to fuel division. Sure, they pass policies that benefit their wealthy donors while at the same time pitting us one against the other. So with this election, let's say no more. Like those brave students down in Florida, like women as part of the Me Too movement, let's come together and fight for economic justice. Let's solve the real problems that are keeping people down and take away their fuel of division. Because that's our job. Our job as Democrats, our job as candidates, our job as Americans is to build a country where people not only survive, but thrive. Let's join our campaign and build an America that works for all of us. Thank you so much.
The question was one experience, wasn't it?
Yes, an experience. One experience.
Now, I was thinking about this. I actually heard the CEO of Microsoft, and he's had tremendous success. And they said, what was the one experience that changed you and made you what you are, so successful? You know what he said? Compassion. Compassion. He actually had a special needs child. And he said that changed his life. And that he saw, you know, the humane needs of a child and what that required of him and everybody around him. That experience with my daughter, I remember when we were at Yale New Haven Hospital for 6 weeks. My wife was sleeping there and I was going there every day I could. And she had special needs that we had to take care of. But we watched other children who were even worse than my daughter. And they didn't survive. So that is something that I will take with me always. Whenever I represent somebody, whenever I try and help somebody, I know what it is to be in those low moments where you don't know if you can make it through. I think that makes you a better
Thank you, Mr. Clay. Mr. Delgado.
I was sitting here thinking about the diversity of my experiences altogether. The fact that I can, on the one hand, talk about spending much of my professional career in the hip-hop community, and then 5 years later spending the second half of my career in litigator in a law firm. Very different set of experiences that have taught me how to be an advocate. and the power of the persuasion. But the more I thought about it, the more I kept coming back to my mother, who had me when she was 21, and who told me, many years later, that doctors told her that she did not have a strong enough heart to have a child. But through faith in her higher power, and through a profound commitment to unconditional love, she gave birth to me and my brother less than 2 years later. Now, the power in that is the love she's taught me over the course of my lifetime, a love that I believe is lacking in our politics more than ever. We are tormented right now by a lack of compassion, a lack of decency, a lack of civility, a lack of love. And it is important that we put people in Congress who are moved by these values.
Well done. Mr. Rowe.
Jeff, your reference to Mosul made me think about a moment that is particularly striking to me, especially with what's happening in our country right now. You show up as a young lieutenant and you're on paper in charge of 20 or 30 soldiers. And I remember standing in a dirt parking lot getting ready to go out on patrol, and my platoon arrayed in front of me in a half circle, and a lot of faces looking at me, looking to me as a leader. And these were faces of different genders and races and religions and sexual orientations. And we disagreed on a whole lot of things, but what we agreed on is we knew we were going to be in a tough situation. We knew we had to have each other's backs, and we had to transcend those differences in a very dark, challenging time. And I think about what it's going to look like in Washington, in a broken Congress. And there's going to be a lot of faces looking at us for leadership. At one of the most dark, divisive times in our country's history, who has the experience of bringing people together to remind us that we share so much more in common than we have different? Thank you.
Now it is your turn to the audience to actually say thank you to these superb 7 candidates that you have. Get your neighbors. Go and vote on June 26th. Let's make a difference.